Thank you. Time for this ballot item has expired. Orders of the day.
Ballot item number 14, Order M28, second reading of Bill 28, an act to proclaim German Pioneers' Day. Mr. Wettlaufer.
Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 28, an act to proclaim German Pioneers' Day.
Thank you. Mr. Wettlaufer has moved second reading of Bill 28, an act to proclaim German Pioneers' Day. Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on July 24, 1788, King George III, by royal proclamation, formed several districts within the then province of Quebec, west of the Ottawa River, now known as Ontario. Those districts are Lunenburg, bounded on the east by the Lancaster Tract and on the west by the Gananoque River, including such towns as Charlottenburg, Cornwall, Osnabrück, Williamsburg, Matilda, Edwardsburg, Augusta, and Elizabethtown. The second district, Mecklenburg, from the western boundary of Lunenburg to the Trent River, comprehending such towns as Pittsburgh, Kingston, Ernestown, Fredericksburg, Adolphustown, Marysburg, Sophiasburg, Ameliasburg, Sydney, Thurlow, Richmond, and Camden. The third district was Nassau, bounded by Mecklenburg on the east and a line north from Long Point, and the fourth district was Hesse, which encompassed the remainder of the province. Mr. Speaker, these districts recognized the then large population of German settlers in Ontario. Mr. Speaker, there have been various waves of German immigration to Ontario. 7, to be factual. Some accounts indicate 3 major waves of immigration, but in total there were 7. The first, of course, was immediately after the American Revolutionary War. Mr. Speaker, over 24,000 German troops fought for the British in the American Revolutionary War because the British didn't have enough troops. After the war, some of those troops came to Canada to stay, most of whom came to Ontario as part of the United Empire Loyalist mass settlement. The United Empire Loyalist definition includes 3 classes of settlers: a nobler class, those forced from the United States by persecution during and after the Revolutionary War, and lastly, disbanded troops. Mr. Speaker, it is estimated that as many as 10,000 of those troops came to Ontario to stay. Unfortunately, the figure is unverifiable because in 1799, then Lieutenant Governor General Peter Hunter struck their names from the list of United Empire Loyalists because, Mr. Speaker, they did not reflect a British connection. After the war, some of those troops continued to serve the British government as spies. During and after the war, many settlers loyal to the Crown from Pennsylvania, New York, and as far south as Georgia immigrated to Ontario, searching for peace and arable land. By 1821, Mr. Speaker, the population of Ontario had grown to 125,000 citizens, of which 70% were German. As many as 25% were German in the eastern parts of this province. Mr. Speaker, by 1821, they were coming not only from the United States, from Georgia, from Pennsylvania, from New York, but they were also coming from Prussia. They were coming from Hesse. They were coming from Saxony. Mr. Speaker, my own ancestors, the Wettlaufers, at that time came from Alsfeld-Hesse. Mr. Speaker, we have a page here by the name of Alison Broman from my riding of Kitchener Centre. Alison's family also came from Hesse. Mr. Speaker, Frank Cleese, the government whip, is a German Canadian. We also have, Mr. Speaker, other descendants in this caucus and in this House of German Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the very first church in Ontario was built by a German Canadian. Mr. Speaker, the first Lutheran minister was Johann Samuel Schwertfeger, who has been described as the saint of the St. Lawrence Seaway, and served the congregations of Williamsburg, Matilda, and Osnabrück. Minister Schwertfeger had been a pastor of congregations in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York, but was persecuted because of his allegiance to the Crown during the American Revolution. He moved to Canada in 1791. After his death in 1798, his son requested that his name be added to the list of United Empire Loyalists, but the reviewing committee did not recommend it because he had never joined the Royal Standard, i.e., he was not a member of nobility. However, his name was put on the list, and beside it is the note, much persecuted. Mr. Speaker, both Julia Monroe of our caucus and Norm Sterling, our House Leader, are descendants of the Reverend Schwertfeger. Mr. Speaker, a few years later, German Lutheran churches were established in Ernestown, Fredericksburg, and Camden East. But, Mr. Speaker, there were laws passed sometime later and prior to the Family Compact to discourage group settlement of Germans because it was felt at that time that they could no longer be easily assimilated if they were in groups. Mr. Speaker, John Graves Simcoe, who had initially attracted German settlement, discouraged group settlement, and he then also changed the names of the districts which had been proclaimed by King George III to reflect a British connection. Mr. Speaker, German place names abound in this province. We have all kinds in Waterloo Region. But, Mr. Speaker, they abound elsewhere, not just in Waterloo Region. And, Mr. Speaker, the German settlers and their descendants have given us much in this province. They're not only the Amish, the Mennonite, which we have, but also other German artisans and German farmers. But, Mr. Speaker, what have the Germans given us? Well, they did give us, in actual fact, the Christmas tree. They actually did give us the Easter bunny and Easter eggs. That came from the German settlers, Mr. Speaker. They gave us kindergarten. They gave us J.M. Schneider meats. Their descendants gave us a Canadian furniture industry that had no equal elsewhere in the world, noted for its fine craftsmanship. Names such as Krug Furniture, Kaufmann Furniture, Bates Furniture, Knechtel Furniture, and the old Hespler Furniture. They gave us Zehrs, a very successful food chain which is now owned by Gale & Weston. They gave us the famous Kraut line of the famous Boston Bruins in the 1940s and 50s. One of them was Milt Schmidt, who grew up across the street from my own father. They gave us Bauer skates, Greb shoes, Dare biscuits. Dare was then spelled D-O-E-R-R. They gave us Economical Mutual Insurance Company, one of the largest property and casualty insurance companies in Canada. They gave us Clarica, which was then Mutual Life Insurance Company. Sir Adam Beck, the father of Ontario Hydro, was a German Canadian. John Diefenbaker was descended from German stock. Ed Schreier, former Governor General of Canada, was of German stock. Louis Breithaupt, a former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, was also of German stock. Mr. Speaker, it has touched all three political parties. Theodore Heinzmann gave us the best pianos ever made in Canada. Daniel Detweiler was the driving force behind the Queenston-Chippewa Canal. He founded the Algoma Power Company, whose idea it was to improve the St. Lawrence Seaway. He also founded the Great Waterway Association of Canada, the Welland Canal locks. It was his idea that gave us the Welland Canal, Mr. Cormos. Elias W.B. Snyder, who improved the flour milling process. Reinhold Lang gave us one of the finest leather tanning processes ever known. Augustus Stephen Vogt was a gifted musician who founded the Toronto Mendelssohn Choir. William Mole Bertsey born Johann Ulrich Molbertzi, who is best known for his portrait of Joseph Brand, but he was the artist who built Yonge Street and Markham Road. Carl Ahrens, an artist whose work hangs in the National Art Gallery. The riding of Waterloo North, which preceded mine, was represented by German Canadians, both provincially and federally. Isaac Erb Bauman, Hugo Kranz, W.G. Mike Weichel, W.D. Eiler, L.O. Breithaupt, Mike Weichel, Albert Smith, and Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on and on. Famous German descendants who have given Ontario much.
Thank you. Further debate? The member for St. Catharines.